Well, hello everyone. John Lockland here. I'm the director of FVD International, Forum for Democracy International. Welcome to this week's forum. Delighted to see that my co-host Peter Lavelle is joining us from Moscow. Jeremy Nell will be on the line shortly from Cape Town. We're immensely honored this week to have two Ukrainian guests, Andrii Telizhenko, former diplomat, former government official, and Oleg Voloshin, also former diplomat, former member of the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry and former member of the Ukrainian Parliament, the Verkhovna Rada. Now, we organized this, we set up this edition of the forum on the end of Zelensky ? About 2 weeks ago. In other words, long before the incredible press conference in the White House, which seemed, for a moment at least, but maybe in the last couple of hours things have turned around. They seemed that press conference seemed to send Zelensky into an absolute tailspin. So the decision to do this forum, as I say, taken well before that, seemed rather prophetic. Perhaps I could go to Andrii Telizhenko first. Andrii, you've been in the Ukrainian embassy in Washington, and you, Oleg, in the Ukrainian embassy in Moscow. I know you're not in the States at the moment, but how do you assess the fallout of last Friday's press conference, Andrii?
I think it's a total disaster for Ukraine. Everybody showed their faces. Zelensky showed his face as a very unprofessional so-called leader. He's not a legitimate leader by the constitution of Ukraine, first of all, but second of all, he showed himself who he really is. A bully who was nurtured for the last 3-4 years by the West, and now he was told the truth into his face. And he basically failed all foreign policy for Ukraine today, which was already failing and going downwards, but he basically expedited it to the situation where we see today. The weapons from the United States are being halted, but so is the intel from the United States, which was just being confirmed by the director of CIA, was being halted to Ukraine. The United States told the United Kingdom to halt all the intel information also to the Kyiv regime. So this is what the situation is today. Zelensky himself, with his own hands, not only destroyed Ukraine the last 3 years, but destroyed all hope for Ukraine peace deal, for at least have Ukraine being on a table with further negotiations. He will sign Ukraine will sign the so-called minerals deal. It will be Zelensky or it will be somebody else, but that will be it. Ukraine will just pay the price for the war to the United States, which was invested. Everything else for Ukraine right now is in a very vague and bad situation, and I think the table has already turned that Ukraine will not be part of the negotiations at all with the United States and Russia. It will be just put into the fact that Ukraine will have to take whatever is going to be decided on by the big guys, by the big diplomacies that do want peace, which Russia talked about for the last years, that they don't want this war. They wanted peace. The same thing with the new administration in Washington today. Hopefully, that there will not be Russophobes in the office of President Trump that will convince him to to continue this war, which I think will not happen because Trump already has a position to stop this, and he hates the Kyiv regime of Zelensky personally because of the situation that happened in his first term with his first impeachment, and with the situation of the so-called phone call, which also led to the first impeachment, and that Zelensky and his team, Yermak, lied to President Trump and his ally Rudy Giuliani, who I was working with at that time, sitting in the room when Yermak confirmed and promised that they're going to investigate Biden crime family and foreign crime, but nothing, and it didn't lead to that.
So, Andrii, if I understand you correctly, you don't place any hope on what President Trump said to Congress last night. Today's the 5th of March, in his State of the Union address, where he said that Zelensky was coming back to the table. Zelensky having written, as you know, a rather miserable little letter of apology saying that he was ready for peace.
We have to understand how President Trump acts. He also said that he is going to continue to work with Ukraine a couple of hours before he halted all the military aid to Ukraine. And then we saw the actions were put by the president's administration. So there's a big frustrations toward Ukraine right now, toward Zelensky, that this has to stop, and they do not support him. They do not support his team. They don't have trust in him that he will continue this war, because he's not just only made a fiasco in the White House, in the Oval Office. He went straightforward. He called over all the European leaders. He went and met with them and tried to continue this war behind Washington's back. So this is a great example of what Kiev regime is doing. And they cannot be trusted in this situation. The same way they were not trusted, cannot be trusted with negotiations, as they did with the Minsk agreements, which they basically threw away and which they signed, ratified, and in the United Nations, and then threw them away and said, oh, it was just a move to build the Ukrainian army with the support of the Europeans. At the same time, with the Istanbul agreements with Ukraine also signed and agreed upon, and then they also moved away. And today, Zelensky not just discreet himself with Russia with the negotiations, but he basically moved away from the United States, his only ally, and the only one who could actually pull the strings to give the aid to Ukraine, because nobody else has the money to pay for this war. And I don't think the United States has the money to pay for this war. Also, they're in a very bad economical situation. We see that they're trying to put their loan into the cryptocurrency, and that's what they're searching for minerals, because they're having a very tough economical situation. Their gold reserve is on a very low level, in the most low level in the last 50 years.
Oleg, could I just go to Oleg, Peter?
I was going to ask you to go first.
Yeah, I was just going to say, is that your view too about Zelensky's future? And if so, do we have any idea of a timeline, Oleg? How long has he got?
I fully agree with what Andrii said. So he really made some brilliant remarks about the meaning of what happened. For me, I'm sure not for people like Andrii, for people like you, John, after all, for people like Peter, it was a moment of fairness, after all. It was like an intervention of the providence, that at last, with the God's help, all the world saw the reality. So for something we've been telling, so it's not Zelensky that surprised anyone who knows who he is. So he was exactly who he is. All of a sudden, this whale of terrible overblowing of his meaningfulness, of his importance, of his absolutely absent in reality significance, it just disappeared. This whale just disappeared, and everyone saw his face as he is. That for me, it was at last. I've seen the Zelensky whom I know for years. He's always been like that, an arrogant, as President said, partly successful comedian, emotionally unstable, drug addicted, etc., etc. So that was and it was such, I believe, the liberals and the globalists who so much now put blame on Vance and on Trump. They do it because they were discredited, because they have questions and stuff from their supporters. Guys, is it the person you've been for years supporting and putting on the podium? So is it Trump who made him like that? No, Trump just made the whale fall down. That's it.
Well, I'd like to ask both Andrii and Oleg, because events have been happening so quickly from Friday to the moment of our meeting right here. Zelensky was thrown out of the White House, okay? Then he got on a plane, and then he was given multiple hugs in the UK. I had a audience with the king himself. Oh, my goodness. In this day and age, I can't understand why that's important to anyone, but we'll leave that aside. And now Zelensky is back in Kiev, and he sent a missive to President Trump, which he gleefully read during his State of the Union address. My question to both of you, who is influencing Zelensky right now? I mean, he fled the United States to an embrace. Was that just kind of therapeutic? Is that the only thing the Europeans bring to the table, are hugs? Because they don't have any money. They don't have any troops. They don't have any logistics. No one knows if British troops were to be deployed, who's going to bring them there? Are they going to walk? Okay. I mean, none of these things are thought out. I guess in the second, corollary to this, what are his pressures? The pressures on him inside of Ukraine. I think that, we've talked about the Europeans, Trump and all of that, but I think a lot of people need to know more about the pressures inside Ukraine. Because everyone knows, I was in finance for a short time, Zelensky is the rainmaker. He makes money. That was his purpose, front man to bring in the money. If he's a discredited front man in front of the most important person, Donald Trump, and he can't make it rain anymore, what is his currency in Ukraine? Oleg, Andrei, whichever one wants to answer.
If I may, I try to be short. Sorry, Andrei. I'll so it's a very good question, because here, for me, really the most difficult part sometimes is to understand who is a puppet and who is who is a script writer, who is control of whom. Because sometimes it looks like it's everyone. There is a general notion, right, especially in Russia. And it's, by the way, mistaken notion that he's absolutely dependent, that whatever Washington says he does, but we see it's not, right? And it has never been the case even with Biden. Those who follow attentively know.
Yeah, but if I can interrupt, Oleg, a lot of people are saying, I cannot confirm this, is that Zelensky is still under the sway of the Democratic Party in the United States. There are people that are saying, that Democrats are saying, we want to trip up Trump as much as you do, blow up the meeting. I can't confirm that, okay?
Look, Peter, we are witnessing the wheels of history rolling as they usually roll. Who was behind Hitler, right? At some point, a lot of people. At some point, he was behind everyone, right? So I don't overestimate, definitely, luckily, and then compare. But we had Mussolini, some personality very similar to Zelensky. Others. At some point, this creature, created by so many, by Johnson, by BlackRock, by different American embassy in Kiev. At some point, it became self-sustainable and so important that already BlackRock and Boris Johnson and Biden become dependent on him. And one of a sudden, in this vicious circle of mutual dependence and mutual corruption, what is most important, and Andrei can tell much more about this, because it's a circle of corruption. If you put away corruption from this, you hardly understand anything. But if you understand that all these people were just earning money together, then it's understandable why they behave like this, why they depend on each other. Why, for instance, Biden should have succumbed sometimes to the arrogance of Zelensky, because he was dependent financially on him. Yeah. And here, all of a sudden, appears Trump and his administration that is not part of this circle. And they say, wait a minute, we're not going to listen to all these lectures of Mr. Zelensky. We are not Boris Johnson. We are not Blinken. So we are outsiders. And we just rushed into the room, and we want to understand who is who. And now we see some strange personality lecturing us in a strange suit, because you remember, it's not the first time Zelensky dressed like that appears in the Oval Office. He's been there. And Biden, dressed in a perfect suit, said nothing about the way, the outfit of Zelensky. Why? Because it was his guy, right? It was part of his circle.
Good point. Andrei, is that your view as well?
Yeah, I can agree with Oleg, and also add that the corruption is just astonishing. First, the idea was, nobody's also talking about not only just corruption, but which I'm going to get to, but also that the West failed in this war. The West failed because they wanted to destroy Russia, cut it apart in 50 pieces. Brzezinski put it on the table to Reagan when the Soviet Union collapsed, but they wanted to go further right now with Russia directly and get their minerals and all the resources Russia has, $75 trillion worth by the World Bank accounted. So this is the situation, what they wanted to do in the first 3 months of the war. They failed, they lost. And that's the main issue here. That's first of all. Second of all, it led from the losing of this process that why not continue this war and continue to make money. We're going to make money parallel to what's going to happen in Ukraine. We're going to money launder everything that we have. Starting from the weapons, what Ukraine was getting. Old weapons, old machinery, everything old, nothing new, because everything that were on paper was one thing. On the real battlefield, it's another thing. So basically, the West is basically getting everything out of their warehouses, cleaning the house, cleaning the fields, getting everything out to Ukraine, saying, oh, we don't have anything now, we have to produce it. For the military-industrial complex to now come in and make more money. The German military-industrial complex rates grew right away after the war started. So this was the result of this whole situation, to continue to make more money on this while Ukrainians and Russians are going to kill each other. Now the United States are looking into this situation because there are confirmations that Zelensky did listen to Susan Rice, to Vindman, that he should not sign this agreement And we know who Susan Rice is. She's the backbone for Obama's administration. She was the chief of staff. She was the one who was also backing the war in Ukraine, in Donbass, when Ukraine was shelling the people in Donbass, and she was the mastermind behind it. So this is the situation where we are today. These people are trying to continue to maneuver Zelensky. Yeah, he is self-sustainable in his own, but at the same time, without their support, he's going to fall apart really fast, because that's the deep state. Trump is trying to fight the deep state in Washington, and Trump is fighting the deep state in Ukraine, because the deep state owns Ukraine. Not only BlackRock, but everybody, Obama's, Clinton's, Nuland's, they're the ones that are behind this. And Nuland's husband was making money on this war. He was making money on the so-called coup in Ukraine in 2014, because that's where it all started to plan from. And this is what the result is. The money is going through United Arab Emirates. There are a lot of Ukrainian oligarchs being behind this, Butkevich and who are rising up right now. They're in the low profile, but nobody's talking about them. They're the ones who were money laundering all this scams for the Americans. And the money was settling into the American taxpayer money was settling into American pockets of their owners of Zelensky. And this is the situation.
For a second there, I wasn't sure you were talking about Ukraine or Afghanistan.
Yes.
Because, no, I mean,
that's
the template. I mean, that's obviously the template, okay? It was a huge, huge grift. And I really appreciate what Oleg had to say. There was a mutual dependence. I think that's something that really needs to be added to the discourse, because everybody was making money. John, you go ahead.
Well, I have
1,000 questions.
Yeah, of course we do. And maybe Jeremy does too. I don't know. Jeremy, do you want to? I've certainly got a question, which is
please talk
to our two guests. I know that you're both not in Ukraine, but is it possible for us to see our way out of this horrific mess, this horrific fog? What are the political forces within Ukraine? If you're right, if you're both right, as I'm sure you are, that his days are numbered, and presumably with them his regime, what next? Who is going to move in to fill the gap?
Oleg?
If you may, maybe Andrii would start.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I will add with the corruption. There's already a lot of Ukrainian officials, from my information, going to Washington and on the high government level officials who are selling out Zelensky and selling out all the scams they were making together with the Dem Party, selling out to save themselves. And this is happening. There's a RICO case which is going to be filed not only against Zelensky and his team and his regime, but against American banks which were involved in this, foreign banks which were involved in this. And it's already being formed today, for my knowledge, and Zelensky has no way out. He's done. He has no way. He cannot go to Russia. He cannot go like Yanukovych had a safe ground. He at least did not bring war to Ukraine, but this guy has no way out. So the way out for Ukraine today, within this situation, is a neutrality. The only guarantee for Ukraine to be left there as a country, if that still is possible, if it's not going to be torn apart like Hitler Germany was torn apart within the Allies and it was divided then, the same thing here in Ukraine. The only way out is its own neutrality. That's their only guarantee for Ukraine to be there, to keep itself in place. No, not the United States, not Europe, nobody. Neutrality of Ukraine, a peaceful country, a sovereign country, which the United States also has to understand in this situation. They have to get out of Ukraine, leave it alone, as they left Afghanistan, and let Ukraine decide what they want to do. Have a neutral government decided within this negotiations process, because today having elections, you cannot vote for the people who are in Ukraine today. Those politicians, not only they are corrupt, but they're all owned by the West. Even the so-called opposition, Arestovich, owned by Novichkin. And there's a lot of questions to people, even like Dubinsky and everybody else, who are involved in this. And Novichkin is owned by Nuland. He was the one who sold out Yanukovych in 2014 in the Munich Security Conference. That's why he has the protection of the Americans, so the people to understand what I'm talking about. And the situation is that there's nobody to choose from. So you have to have a neutral government agreed upon by Moscow and Washington that will come to power in Ukraine, and then within time frame, bring in the elections to have the opposition involved, a real opposition that is not in Ukraine today, the people to come and have a possibility to be...
Andrii, who can disagree with you on that? But how do we get there? I mean, I can't imagine, in all seriousness,
an agreement between Washington and Russia.
Okay, yeah, and Trump definitely wants that. But what Ukrainian politician can go on the stump and campaign on neutrality. I think that that person would have a bullet in their head within a few hours. I'm sorry to say that, okay? Because, I mean, Ukraine in the best of days was a bit fragile, okay? And this is just thrown it into into a, what is it, a dumpster fire is turned it into. I guess I think, and maybe John can back me up here, I just think of November 1918 when the high military structures of Germany said, we're out, okay? And then when they gracefully gave it to the socialists, now it's your problem. We know what happened to them. We know what happened to the Weimar Republic. I just don't see that space. How do you go from here to here?
That is the problem. If I could add, before Oleg, just 1 second. From my view, that's what has to be a neutral government, not the United States decide who's going to be president, because everybody's right now looking up who's going to Washington supporting Ukraine. No, America supported for the last 10 years in Ukraine. We saw that it brought to war. It has to be agreed upon, a neutral government by Russia and Washington that is going to come in, clean the house within Ukraine. It's going to be, and you have to understand, Ukraine has to be left alone as a sovereign neutral country. But with Ukraine sovereign neutral country, it should be part or under the umbrella of Moscow. We're not going to the Anglo-Saxon world. We're not saying to London, to Ottawa, and trying to disturb their peace there and trying to bring the Russian world into their world. So we're trying to bring Ukraine back to where it came from. We were part of Russia for 350 years. We're one nation. We went through the civil war, as you mentioned, in 1918, millions of deaths, and the country was brought back together. It fought the Second World War together, and it was prosperous together. So this is the same situation today. To bring back is an agreement upon a neutral government that is going to be also understandable under future Russia, or as a neutral sovereign country, Ukraine, or as a part of Russia. It depends on how the military process is going to go. This is how I see it. That's the only guarantee is Ukraine not to move anywhere westward, because it doesn't have to be this way. The westward Ukraine brought war to itself.
Yeah, Oleg.
I would again. I'd like to follow up on what previously Andrii said. We need to start from the roots of the problem. The roots is corruption again. Unless Biden, unless Biden administration, that's what now I understand. It's not a mistake what I started saying. All of Biden administration involved in the genocide of Ukraine is thoroughly investigated. Unless people at the medium level, that is also very important. Not just like start Blinken, like say Rice and others. There's a medium level people in the intelligence community. That's very important, and it's a unique chance in history now that Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard might make a serious cleanup in these structures, in the intelligence community, in State Department, in Pentagon. Unless everyone, not even at the top, not only the political appointees, but also those who were managing the particular money flows, are investigated. As soon as it starts, Andrii said, Ukrainians, that's a typical for Ukrainians. There will be a queue standing in Washington with different blocks of piles of paper with different material about Biden and others. Because everyone will be happy to give away another one to protect himself. So you don't need to make a big investigation in Kiev. Ukrainians will come on their road to Washington and say he's guilty, that guy is guilty, that guy is guilty. And when we have this huge anti-corruption process of the century, possibly, then there will be no taste in the West or elsewhere to continue with this money laundering machine that Ukraine used to be. If there is nothing like that in the West, doesn't matter who is at the top. There'll be always new Zelensky, always new money laundering. So the most dangerous thing here is if Trump guided into the geopolitical aspect. The geopolitics, it is just a whale. If he talks about territory, NATO, etc., it just sounds meaningful, but in fact it's meaningless. Meaningful is the role of Ukraine in appropriate enrichment of the American and partly British and European establishment. That's the case. If we start going down this path, it can very much change inside the West as well. That is what's important. You Westerners should first and foremost ask, where is our money? who became rich with our money. Let's put aside all this moral question, geopolitical question, history questions. It sounds very difficult, but it's very simple. Why my $100 was taken from my pocket, and at the end of the day, Ukraine military got $2. Where is the 98 from this? Where is the 98 from this 100 note?
You're right. You're absolutely right. But I already brought up Afghanistan. No one's put on trial for what they did in Afghanistan.
Right.
So it's
that's the problem.
It's not going to happen. But what's most important is for the end of the fighting. Now, maybe John can jump in on this one as well. I mean, the biggest barrier right now, other than Zelensky and his mafia around him, are the Europeans. I mean, talk about a moment of inflection. I mean, this is the time. The stars are lining up, except for the Europeans are not on board here. And
well, that's because
you think, Oleg and Andrii, that we had another Boris Johnson moment here over the last few days. Stick it out. We're going to stay with you. I mean, are they going to fall for that trick twice? Or maybe it's because of the reasons you've both been enumerating on. Yeah, the money is too good to end it.
Yeah, but Peter, I just want to note, Brits, it's very noticeable. Brits were the first to fall apart, actually, here, I mean, in Europe. So unlike what many expected, London is not the greatest warmonger, at least publicly today. Vice versa. It looks like Starmer is a guy who tries to normalize Zelensky, who tries to persuade him to rethink his behavior. It's Kaya Kallas and all these other crazy guys on the continent who pretend they can go both against the US and Russia.
And China. Kaya Kallas is also going to defeat China as well.
All right. China.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say about the Europeans. I think maybe Oleg, or perhaps I'm thinking of someone else, tweeted recently that everyone that the European, I mean, it's obvious that the European, the bureaucrats that you've just mentioned, Oleg, and obviously Ursula von der Leyen, they're trying to use the Ukraine war to ramp up as ever the powers of the European structures. Right. So Ursula von der Leyen is talking about 800 billion, just as she did under COVID and so on. So they have an interest in the continuation of the war because they think it will give them more power for Europe. Zelensky obviously has an interest because as soon as the war stops, he's over. But on the other hand, all this stuff about the Europeans is not really very serious because firstly, they're completely divided. They all want different things. And above all, their capacities are very limited. They're talking about, France and Britain together are talking about sending less than 30,000 troops. Well, Russia, as far as we know, has 500,000 or 600,000 troops in Ukraine. So it's not really clear how. Yes, of course, they don't want the peace to break out. They're like Mother Courage in Bertolt Brecht's play. They live off the war and they need it to continue, and their world will fall apart if it ends. But it's not very clear. Particularly given the fact that United States and Russia, their interests, not only are their positions converging, but their interests are converging in the sense that they both want peace for different reasons, but they both want peace. And frankly, they both want the weakening of Europe and the weakening of Ukraine. If Europe and Ukraine continue to weaken each other, if Europe continues to weaken Ukraine, that's not bad for Russia, unfortunately.
Right. That's the point.
Well, it's not good for Ukraine either.
Yeah,
it's not good for Ukraine, of course not.
It's wrong to expect from Moscow to care much for what remains from Ukraine after it gets more or less good deal for itself. So if Ukraine remains a burden for Europe, still better, you are right. If it remains a black hole with a lot of people with ruined psychology, with who became handicapped because of the military action, who are deprived, who feel unfairness of the war, who come back from trenches to see that as long as they were sitting there and losing their friends and getting wounded, etc., others earned billions. All this hatred will be addressed towards, partly towards people inside Ukraine, but also it will be new gangsters coming to Europe, new criminals coming to Europe, etc., etc. Good for Russia, because Russia will close the border. It's already sealed, right? And it will continue as it is used to be. Good for the United States, because here, right, Zelensky was right. He said you have an ocean, nice ocean. It will be a problem of Europe. I agree. That's why it's Europeans should have thought now and before, and should think now not of how to continue the war, but what to do with Ukraine after the war is over. That's the problem, because it's not Afghanistan you can just leave and you get just several thousand, even tens of thousands of refugees. You get Afghanistan next to you.
Exactly.
That's the point.
Exactly.
Andrii and Oleg, again, looking at what's going on inside Ukraine, ever since the coup of 2014, I've been monitoring this very carefully. And I guess USAID funded most of it. This virile Russophobic tropes that have been pumped into Ukrainian media, society, into the schools and all of that. Obviously, Ukraine has been traumatized, or at least people without means. Rich people always are safe, but a great many of Ukrainians have been traumatized by all of this. Given the propaganda hysteria going back to 2014, how does Ukraine start recovering from that? Because we all know it's coming to an end. None of us know exactly how it's going to come to an end. And I tend to think, and I'm very wary of predictions. I pride myself on not doing it. Most people that do it make fools out of themselves. But I tend to think, maybe I'd like to get the reaction of all of you, once it starts happening, it's going to happen pretty fast. It's going to be kind of a cascade effect. But what about Ukrainian political culture right now?
What I could add to this is just the Ukrainians right now are torn apart, not just physically, the Ukraine itself, but mentally. A lot of radicals are still there. There's the radicalization we saw backing up Zelensky after his failure in the Oval Office. And then a lot of people started to understand that this is over and they have to move forward. The problem is Ukraine was psychologically broken, as you said and mentioned, starting from building anti-Russia, putting away the Soviet Union's past, that is bad, it's negative, saying that it didn't bring anything to Ukraine for the last 30 years, and the last 10 years was building up pretty aggressively within this propaganda machine. I was there in the government. I left, thank God, the government in 2017 or in 2016, and I started fighting against it, against all this foreign rule in Ukraine, and because I understood it's going to lead to war, because war was already happening in Donbass at the time. Problem is, Ukrainians were lifted. That's why Ukraine is called Nazi country, Nazi nation right now, because the pride of Ukrainians were lifted, that there's some privileged nation over everybody else. The Russians are nobody, the Belarusians are nobody, the Europeans owe them, the Americans owe them, and that's the problem. Nobody right now in Ukraine understands and doesn't want to understand the people to bring that pride down and say, we lost, that we were wrong. Yesterday we had the world backing us up, the Western world. Today they told us the truth, it's over. And that psychological breakdown to believe that they were wrong, all of them, just even regular people. Everybody is very involved in politics in Ukraine, starting from schools and teachers and children, and ending with politicians. The problem is to acknowledge that the failure that they lost, the failure that they lost because of their pride and because of their aggression. Because there's no aggression from Russia towards Ukraine, but there's so much aggression from Ukraine towards Russia. And to break that down is after this ends. That's what I'm saying. To have Ukraine has to be and has to come back towards Russia, because that's the only economical way out for Ukraine to survive if it wants to survive. We saw how the West blocked all its grain, ending with telling the truth to Ukrainians, what really happened in Ukraine, to break down the propaganda. What Oleg also said, the corruption, to investigate the corruption that happened, to tell the people the truth, who was behind this, with names, figures, with numbers, who was behind building up the negativity towards Russia in the Ukrainian society, to tell that openly to Ukrainians, to have them watch every news, not just the telemarathon, the national television channel that brings them only victory every day, even though the Ukrainians are losing. And I can tell you they're losing not just because we're talking about it here, or it's politically my position, but the situation is that Ukraine is losing because I've been talking to people on the front line, northern Kharkiv. They're saying we're sending one drone towards Russia, the Russian forces, they're sending back 40 drones. We're hitting one shell, they're hitting with 50 shells back. And that, because we're standing in those positions by Kharkiv, it's not our privilege there because we are standing there, not our victory. It's just because the Russians are not moving forward. That's why we're still there. That's what they're saying. So, and they are already starting to understand that something is wrong, and you have to work with that. that's the future of Ukraine, to break down this propaganda because it was fake. And this fake, it thought was built up historically for Ukrainians for hundreds of years to hate Russians. We were part of one nation.
To interrupt, I just want to catch upon some ideas that Andrei has just expressed. I'm not afraid of being again hated by Ukrainian nationalists. Already they hate me enough, so it's okay. Some harsh truths, in Ukrainian political language, the antonyms, the opposite to victory is not failure. It's betrayal. It's zrada. Yeah? So political Ukrainians, because I always say we are all Ukrainian, but we are all different. Like Andrei, his native language is Ukrainian. My native language is Russian, but we both don't belong to this political Ukrainian. This is very specific phenomenon, right? So that's why whatever I say next about Ukrainians, I mean this specific phenomenon of political Ukraine. So for them, it's a very specific. It's not a nation. It's like a political club. People never accept responsibility for their own mistakes, failures, misgivings, wrong beliefs, etc. And Trump is making a great favor to them, frankly, and to the whole world through creating this big treason. So they would never accept failure. They would never accept defeat, but they are ready to accept a betrayal. So we were betrayed by America. The greatest supporter of us. We were betrayed, and that's why we lost. Otherwise, we would have already captured Moscow. But look, Trump elected. I told it before Trump was elected. We need Trump to get elected for one simple reason: for many in Ukraine to get a psychological permission to stop fighting and to accept the end of war. Because they understood long ago that it's already lost. But psychologically, for Ukrainians, it's impossible to say what it was all for. So we should have just implemented Minsk agreements. We could have kept territory. We could have kept billions of money, economy, and what is most important, hundreds of thousands of lives. And so we lost all that, and still we are in a much worse position than we used to be back in 2019 when Zelensky was elected with a mandate to implement Minsk agreements. These same people will never say it was our fault. We didn't press Zelensky enough. We didn't take to the street to require peace. But now there is a big treason. Trump betrayed us. Okay, good. Now we all go home, not because we lost, but because we were betrayed. So that's why let's not overestimate. They are not Chechens. They are not Afghans. So it will be luckily much easier with them. I know Andrei told me, we just called each other recently, that a lot of people who just several months ago, a year ago, where we'll kill you, we'll find you, now calling him and say, pass best regards to Trump administration, etc., etc. Already a lot of people telling me, oh, maybe living under Russia is not that bad. After all, we speak Russian, they still need good political technologies, they still need good PR technologies. We are still better than Russians, but we can be better off in Russia than the Russians themselves. So all of a sudden, Ukrainians remember that all their history, they were surviving being sharp-witted, being a bit crooked, being a bit more entrepreneurial than Russians, not being stubborn Afghans who are fighting, sleeping with a Kalashnikov under the pillow, etc. I was told them, you are not Afghans. You cannot sacrifice generations of your children to the idea of great sacred war. You are different. You cannot fight all your life. You're different by mentality. And Trump gave them a good excuse. We are betrayed. Now we go all home. So that's why I'm so happy it's happening. Not only factually, but also psychologically, because it's a wonderful exit strategy. We haven't lost. We just were betrayed. Okay, we are betrayed. That's why we stop fighting. Fine.
If we could wave a wand, if Putin could wave a wand and everything will be perfect tomorrow, what do you think Putin would be happy with?
If I may start with it, so I don't want to sound like, again, it's very easy to say, oh, he wants to praise Putin. But I would say that among many Russians I know, I don't know Putin personally, but I know a lot of people who work very closely with him. He's one of the last pro-Ukrainian Russian politicians, actually.
That's right.
He never really dreamt of total annihilation of Ukraine. Yes, he always says one people, but he never, but meaning one people, he just thinks that it's unnatural for part of this big tree of nations, for one part of this tree to be in one block, another part to be in another block.
Well, Oleg, it's Ruski Mir. I mean, I think if you understand that concept.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that he cannot accept Ukrainians living in their own state. So exactly. he does accept. Look at Belarus. Mr. Lukashenko gave an interview to Maria Nofal, right? Just recently, right? This is everywhere broadcasted now. He made some points that I'm sure are not really liked very much by people in Kremlin. And especially when he said, like, I know the real reaction when he said, "I'm waiting for Trump, Zelensky, and Putin to come here, and I'll arrange the negotiations, and everything will be fine." Very typical for Lukashenko. But what happens? In 30 minutes, appears Mr. Peskov, press secretary of Mr. Putin, and says, "Good. That's a good idea. Why not? Let's come to Minsk. It's not up to us to decide. But if it were like that, they just like to flatter even Lukashenko with this. It could have been easily to say, oh, come on, Mr. Lukashenko, what the hell? Why should we come to Minsk? But I mean, for Putin, the existence of Ukraine that pretends it's great, that pretends it influences everything, the whole world rolling around, fine with that. Just stop being a menace to us. The real thing he's concerned is for Ukraine to stop being a territory from which a real threat to Ukrainian national security, again, security, not national pride, not national dignity, not some imperialistic plans, but security comes from. So we don't want to have Hamas controlling Gaza next to us. That's what Russians say to me all the time. Yeah. Okay, you can always say you created it. It's a different story. Their responsibility for getting a kind of Hamas threat next to them. But what they really want as of today, they want some guarantees that people like Budanov, like others who are behind the terrorist attacks, different acts of sabotage, and others are out of job. So they don't want to get something like Israel has. Never-ending war. You have a hotter war and colder war.
Oleg, look at the historical irony and tragedy. If, and I doubt it will happen, but if there were the talks were to convene in Minsk, wouldn't millions and millions of Ukrainians say, but we were already at Minsk, but we lost hundreds of thousands of troops just to go back to the exact same table, and Putin will have exactly the same demands. That would be grotesquely ironic.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. But anyway, it's still Lukashenko. You know, it would have been strange if he shouldn't have said that. Yes, one should have expected him to say this.
No, Lukashenko is like the crazy uncle at your table at Thanksgiving, and that's how he's kind of seen. You know.
Andrii, do you want to respond to Graham's question?
Yeah, I think Oleg put out openly everything what he actually knows better, the situation in Russia. But from my understanding, that Putin would never want this war to happen if he had this won. He would never want it to invade Ukraine. This was not his plan. If Russia wanted to do this, they could have destroyed Ukraine easily. Look at Gaza, total destruction, total blackout, nothing there. Yeah, there's destruction in the eastwards where the war zone directly happening, but look at other cities in Ukraine, they're still standing, even the capabilities of Russia. So, and this is not even my words, Trump said this. Russia could have destroyed Ukraine completely. They only did it 20%. Unfortunately, it led to this. But if Putin, he never wanted this war, and we see how for him, this war is not just a war, political war. It's a war that he thinks about not only he thinks about the people, not only the Ukrainians, and he talked about it in his speech before going into Ukraine. Remember, let the soldiers just capitulate, and we will not continue. Nobody will die. But it led to more and more deaths, and he was ready to sign peace deals in Minsk and Istanbul. It led to more deaths. So I think this is what could won: no war. No continuation of this war to continue until today, to end it as soon as possible, and to have Ukraine, as Oleg said, not be a threat to the Russian national security. Look at a great example, as I said, look at Belarus. It's there, it has its own opinion. Nobody likes Belarus because it has its own opinion. It's under the umbrella of Russia, but it's there, and it will be there. The problem is with Ukraine. Will there be Ukraine? Belarus will stay. Ukraine may not stay. So this is the situation we are in today.
Andrei, it's been mentioned even by Trump, the level of devastation that could have happened over the last 3 years hasn't happened, but where most of the destruction is Russia will have to rebuild it itself. Okay, it won't be the West that'll be doing it. It'll be rebuilding Lugansk and Donetsk and other oblasts. And so reconstruction is going to be, and we've seen it in Mariupol. It's real. Okay,
yeah.
So
you see, sorry for interrupting you, but I just want to remark. Karaganov once wrote, Sergei Karaganov, a prominent Russian scientist, political expert, he once wrote, the worst thing Americans can do for us is to give away all of Ukraine to us, for us to take care, to be responsible for the construction of all of Ukraine. So that's a nightmare because Russia just doesn't have enough money. So you're right, actually. So it's already a burden. And if someone thinks that Putin doesn't take into account economics, he's totally wrong. He bases his decision on one principle thing. He wants Russia to remain stable and sustainable. That's his principal priority. That's why so slow pace of the movement of troops. That's why this compromises with Erdogan, friend Erdogan, and many other things. And as of today, the economic prospects are not that brilliant, actually. There are serious problems, and rapprochement, some kind of detente with the United States, with some sanctions lifted, is exactly what Russia needs, actually, economically. And that would be a big victory, by the way, for Russia as well, to show that it not just got what it wanted politically, not everything, but a lot, but that it remained economically viable. That's very important for Putin. That he really does care for. He doesn't want to sacrifice everything. It's not like he doesn't want a Pyrrhic victory, that's for sure.
Could I ask both of you, you've mentioned particularly Oleg, but also Andrei, you've both mentioned the psychology, the psychological, the trauma, the fallout, the obvious trauma which any nation suffers in wartime, well, psychological and physical, obviously. Again, I know that you're not on the ground, but somebody remarked to me recently that Ukraine could experience a civil war, not as before between pro and anti-Russian, the East and the West and so on, but instead between the different social groups. Oleg, you've mentioned corruption at great length. Will there be a sense, do you think, in Ukraine of rebellion against these elites, the oligarchs and so on, the people who've been siphoning off money, or is the country too weakened now for that to crystallize? What do you think?
If I could start, are we talking about this for last year and a half, especially that this might lead after the war, it always leads to this, but the situation by going back to the Europeans, that they might, the most money they can get is to finance a guerrilla warfare. And this is what I think is looking into. And this is what the globalists are trying to continue and look into, to basically disrupt the peace process, or even if the peace process will happen, to basically put Somalia right on the border with Russia. And they have a buffer zone for them. Poland, they're building up the army there. The US is actually the only place they're not going to actually remove the militaries from Poland, because they understand that's going to be the new buffer zone. And the situation is the guerrilla warfare finance, a couple of $1 billion a year, will lead to this and keep this fire glowing. That's why Ukraine needs to have something, an umbrella like Belarus has under Moscow, that will bring stability and peace and push down this guerrilla warfare with the support of the intelligence groups. Or not only because Ukraine is not going to have anything left, the intel groups that are left there, they're not capable of doing nothing because they're part of this regime and killing of the people. So this is the situation we're going to bring into Makhnovshin, that we had this after the 1918s, where it happened, and now it's going to be basically coordinated and financed by the so-called Europeans. Why they want to continue this, and I think that's the biggest problem that Trump administration may also have, and how to stop it. And will they be able to stop it? They won't. Only Russia will be able to stop it, and they have already the experience of doing this in Chechnya. They have the experience of doing this in other regions, and historically in Ukraine and Western Ukraine when they were fighting. So I think this is what the Ukrainian future will look like.
Yeah, I agree. In general, as a professional in history, revolutions rarely happen for social reasons. They have social reasons deep behind, but the pretext is always political. There needs to be something political that blows up everything. So that's why in Ukraine you can take all the money from the people, but still they would never take to Maidan. And if you just say some capitulation, you can arrange kind of Maidan. But anyway, most of these things have always been. Even I'm strongly against the theory that all people taken to the streets in Ukraine paid, etc. That's not true. People were in different periods of time really motivated by their desires, fantasies, ideas, fears, etc. But there has almost been some force driving it, navigating in some direction. So that's why a social unrest is impossible, because no one is interested to have no one in the elite outside of Ukraine that influences Ukraine or inside of Ukraine is interested in it. That's the problem. So you can have a huge level of criminality, that's for sure, as a kind of new Robin Hoods, without just distributing money among the poor. A new Pablo Escobars. That's something we're gonna have for sure after the end of the war. But it's not. It won't be a Bolshevik revolution because we don't have. It's different period of history, and we don't have the German general staff behind it. no one to organize Bolshevik party. Russians, luckily or unluckily, just don't have the technology how to do it. And those who have, they would make.
Speaking of which, Oleg and Andrei, at this stage of the conflict and the shifting currents that are going on in the United States and Europe, how intact and how much solidarity does the ruling elite have in Ukraine? Do they have each other's back, or will they pull a knife out at the drop of a hat? I mean, because when we're talking, I find it fascinating what you both said about potential civil war, social unrest. But if the elites are cohesive and have a general consensus, it will make that kind of social unrest much more difficult and possibly even more explosive. So how much cohesion does the elites have?
If I may start here, I would say the greatest tragedy, one of the greatest tragedies, a lot of, but one that I noticed just came to understand recently in Ukraine, that the elite remain the same. So I remember just before even the war, there were some warmongers when it was for some smart people, there was understandable choice between compromise with Russia in terms of Minsk agreements, etc., or escalation up to the war. There were some warmongers who were saying we need this war as a kind of national cleansing. We need to get rid of all this corrupt elite. We need a new Ataturk. We need to have some Garibaldi. We need some. The war will be, yes, it will be a big, great sacrifice, but still Ukraine will get better off from it. And now what I see, Yulia Tymoshenko saying something. Petro Poroshenko, that's ridiculous. We've been brought, so we just mentioned Lukashenko. We have allegedly very different political system in Ukraine, but still same family names, actually, who were going ahead in history together with Lukashenko. So Tymoshenko, Poroshenko, even the suffixes are the same, right? And that's a tragedy. That's a tragedy, because really the war, with all its sacrifice, with all its terrible casualties and the price on demographics and economy, hasn't produced anyone. We have only Zaluzhny and still very artificial phenomenon. So no one from among the field commanders, among the generals, etc., no one got to the prominence. Even the leaders of the radical nationalists, Zelensky, they're all the same. Actually, they've been there since Maidan. So that's why when you ask about elite, yes, it's very coercive. It used to be until recently navigated from one center. That's the Tankova Street where the US embassy is situated. It doesn't matter, radical nationalists or socialists, most of them, but with a small exception of those who were supported Russia-friendly course. They are all the time coming there for the instructions. Now it will be different. And the greatest tragedy for them, they don't understand that Trump administration doesn't want to micromanage Ukraine. That's for sure. So whatever is the result, Trump administration wouldn't be the sheriff in town, as they say. It's a sheriff in town in the US. It's not a sheriff in town in Kiev. And they're not. They for decades got accustomed to having a sheriff in town, good or bad, sharing with him some revenues, telling him some compromise against each other, etc. Now there is no sheriff at all. How it will all navigate the life, I don't know, because it will be very difficult without a US ambassador sitting in the middle of the room and bringing together Zelensky and Poroshenko, Tymoshenko and Yatsenyuk and all others. They're like children in kindergarten. They need a nanny, and there is no nanny now. Sorry, Andrii, for being
in other words, we have no idea. Andrii, I want to give you the last few minutes. We have no idea then who might come next. Andrii, is that your view?
Yeah, I can add to what Oleg said. Yes, that's why they were all in power, because of the U.S. embassy, because the sheriff was in town, because they were all sold out. Poroshenko had his money sold out to the West, and Klitschko is a German citizen. So all these people are working with the West. Tymoshenko has her own ambitions and trying to get in under Trump or Clinton and everybody else. So they were all coordinated. Now the situation is going to may fall apart, and Zelensky, losing all favorability in the West, is going to get his knife in his back. They're like spiders. They're going to destroy him from within, and then they're going to try to continue who's going to come to power. From all those people there in Ukraine, I do not see anybody who can lead Ukraine to a peace path and to a normalization of Ukraine and stability, because they're all from the same bucket. They all have the same owner, is the deep state, the globalists who own them. And they're going to continue to own them until the Ukraine is going to have a clean house. This is the problem what we have in Ukraine today, and this is what it has to lead to. Why Russia and Ukraine needs to be back together, and that's what I think is going to be good for Ukraine. Look at Afghanistan. The United States left Afghanistan. Everybody's quiet. Nothing's happening there. There's no opium, nothing. No terrorist attacks, nothing. It's all quiet. Yeah, there's the Taliban, but there's no commotion. There's no stability there. The same thing with Ukraine. As soon as the West leaves Ukraine, there's going to be peace and stability, and we're going to go back to our roots. And then we can choose who. Then we can choose who's the leader. The leaders are not in Ukraine today. None of them who are in Ukraine can be trusted. The leaders are all outside of Ukraine, fled. They're the real opposition, and even some of them who even fled Ukraine today, like Arestovich and others. There's a big question: who's financing them? The oligarchs who are also working with the West. So you have to choose from politicians who can come back to Ukraine and actually have a government experience to bring back Ukraine to life and to bring back Ukraine to peace with its all neighbors. That's what I can say.
Gosh, well, there we are. So the future is, as ever, an unknown country, and in particular, it seems, where Ukraine is concerned. Oleg, Voloshin, Andrii, Telizhenko, you've been absolutely wonderful. It's very kind of you to give us your time. And Peter Lavelle and Jeremy Nell for co-hosting. Thank you all very much indeed. And maybe we can get you back in a month or two's time to see what, if there are any developments. Thank you both very much. And thanks to our viewers for watching. What?
Thank you.
Yeah.
God bless.
Okay, bye. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.